You can get ad-free episodes of the Forest School podcast, as well as bonus episodes and exclusive access to upcoming guests to ask them questions before anybody else finds out about it, simply by visiting patreon.com/Children of the Forest.
I'm Wem.
And I'm Lewis.
This is the Forest School podcast.
Let's go! So, sludge content, right?
Yeah.
Sounds lovely, doesn't it? Sludge content.
Sounds like what I need to contact the nice man with his big tanker and his big hose pipe to come to my house.
And sludge content. Oh, I don't know, lad. You got a lot of sludge content in there.
To pump the shit out of my lawn.
Well, I'm guessing this is where it comes from. I was just telling you, sludge content is this thing that's like on even in like short form videos like TikTok and YouTube Shorts and all those things where they split the video in half. And they have normally the top half is, and maybe we're feeding into this, the top half is like somebody talking in like a podcast or somebody talking in an interview. And then the bottom half of the screen is something with no sound, but something that's like visually very satisfying. Like, have you seen the ones where it's like sand getting cut into like blocks, or like soap cutting is one, I think, or somebody playing a video game in a very smooth way, or something that like, and it made me think about, because we talked about soft focus in a different episode, and I found this really interesting clip from there's a YouTube guy called Vsauce, and he is talking about like how much he thinks that any behavior that you see is just any behavior is normal human behavior. It's just in a slightly different frame now. So he was talking about how many of us, like, you know, that way where you might go, the equivalent for sort of school stuff might be like, oh, the kids just don't look when they're talking to you. Like they look at their phone when they're talking to me, and you can't do two things. You can't be doing that. And in this clip, he's talking about like, you know, people used to talk to each other and look at the birds. Yeah. And like that you wouldn't have to make eye contact with the person fully. And saying like, that is the equivalent of sludge content. You're looking at the birds you're looking at the squirrels running around and doing their thing.
Or you're like making some twine at the same time as talking to somebody, or skinning an animal, or picking berries. Or... Yeah.
And that like, but we see those things as very wholesome and very like, ooh, parallel play, and ooh, isn't that nice? It's handwork, or it's keeping both sides of their brain active. And then when it's like content wise, it gets like, oh, kids have no attention spans, and then their brains are shot, and all these things.
I was listening to a podcast in the middle of the night on crowd science, which is on BBC Sounds, and they have like little questions that are sciencey, and then experts answer them. And the question was, why do we get bored? And I thought, oh, that'll be interesting. And then I just had to turn it off, because it was, things about, our attention spans becoming shortened through screenage, and like trying to get your children to like stick at something and really make them get bored, because boredom is great. And I was like, well, it's just too depressing. Stop it. Stop. Because I agree that boredom is good. And it was saying about how the things you do after you've been bored are often like the best things. You know, you've given your brain this like awkward, hard experience of being bored. And then the thing that you do is usually a really good thing.
Yeah, but there's a difference, isn't there? There's a difference between becoming bored because there's like a legitimate, the resources have run out, or the play cycle has come to an end, or the thing is the thing. And then there's a difference between that and feeling bored because someone is like withholding visible or accessible entertainment in that way that is like, that is, I think, sometimes where it goes wrong is that thought of like, oh, make people get bored. Make people get bored. And like, you're not going to get bored if you can see the thing you want, because you're just going to go, I wish I had the thing. I wish I had the thing. Which is interesting. This is all, I wasn't intending this to be linked, but this is linked. to the book that I have read. The people on our Patreon have seen. Look, we can do the lovely ASMR thing.
I can't actually hear that. I think Zoom is stopping the noise coming through. No, yeah.
This is me flickering all the little tabs. There's loads of them on the book Exercised, The Science of Physical Activity, Rest and Health. That's by Daniel Lieberman. And I sort of started reading this as I was going to say a fun book. It was still a fun book right to the end, as a book for pleasure. And then the longer I read it, the more I was like, this is really interesting to what we do. Because Daniel Lieberman, let me get this right, because I looked up what he is. He is a paleoanthropologist, which is a branch of paleontology and anthropology which seeks to understand the early development of anatomically modern humans, a process known as hominization. So he looks at things like petrified skeletal remains, bone fragments and footprints, cultural evidence such as tools, artifacts and settlement localities. And it's specifically, obviously, about like exercise and movement and all this stuff. And it really struck a chord with me because I think I'm always interested in finding those things that are like unspoken, like in a community, like, because they value this, but they don't ever say that they value this. And it occurred to me that I've seen over the years lots and lots of stuff about forest school and physical activity, and I have done this as much as anybody else, and like inextricably linking the two. Like, get your kids outside. It is physical activity. Forest school is this like thing. Kids at forest school burn 1 million more calories a second. Kids don't sit down for a minute at forest school, and also and then tying that to the weather, and particularly here in the UK, it being like, don't ever stop moving in the winter. That's the secret. The secret is running around. That's the secret of survival. That's what we're meant to do. Kids get bored and they need to move this, and so I find it really interesting because some of the stuff in this book really debunks that idea. And then the more I was reading it and thinking about how our groups have developed. And I think this is one of the things where I would say, there's a big gap in the forest school, like academia, research stuff. And one of the things that I think is missing is stuff about long-term child-led like community and how they develop in more of that self-directed education way. Lots of the stuff that the science stuff that I read, the like peer-reviewed articles and stuff, is always like, these children were given a 12-week forest school program, or these children were given, exposed to this, or children at a nursery did this. And so it's coming from a maybe slightly more top-down way, or it's coming from a leader who goes, they might be on that spectrum journey somewhere where they're like, I know some forest school leaders that would be like, I've got the 8-week sessions and I know what the 8 sessions are, and then I do that with year 4, and then I do those 8 sessions with year 3, and then I do those, but letting things develop over a really long time, like we've been able to do, and how those things crop up. So I've got this huge list of things, right? So they're talking, one of the things in this book that I found some of it is just really silly. And they talk about adults are calorie cautious, right? Which is that we instinctively, once we reach adulthood, there's a lot in this book where they're like, if it doesn't help you procreate, your body does not want to do it, right? So in terms of like, have you got enough food? What can you shut down but still procreate? That is the thing, right? And so then talking about that like intrinsic motivation and movement needing to be fun and whatever. But one of the things he says that dogs and children are in no way calorie cautious. They don't have that system that we maybe unknowingly have, where we go, I won't run now because I might need to run later, or I might want to do. And he's described it as when you open the door at the park, the children and the dogs run. And just go like, fuck, I need to go, like, that thing of like. And then I was talking to my wife about this, and we were saying like, that's why extended physical exercise, like a long family walk or a hike somewhere, is more difficult for children because they just don't have that regulator built in.
Yeah. I took it's the summer holidays right now, and I took my kids and my dog for a walk last week, and by the end of it, they were crying, like tears were actually coming out of their eyes. Even really that long. It's probably like an hour and a half long, and just around my local area. But yeah, they were crying. And I found it really hard to be sympathetic. They were like hot, angry, crying tears.
Yeah.
Why would you do this to us? You should have known. I was like, it's a loop. I can't. They were like, we're going to take a shortcut. I was like, there is no shortcut. Like, we're going home now. And we are going home now. This is the return leg of the shortcut of the, of the loop. And that, hot, angry tears all the way. Not good.
Mate.
Anyway, sorry, I've derailed you.
No. But it just made me think about, again, whether that is they don't really go into it in detail, but I find it interesting to think about whether that is a learned skill or a developed skill in terms of like, whether you can actually teach children to pace themselves. Is that something that they get?
That's such an interesting question.
Yeah. So is that something? And then, because if it isn't, if you take the view that no, that just doesn't happen because they're not built for procreating, they're built at that point for exercising and building and growing, then it begs the question whether extended exercise is a fair thing to ask them to do.
Yeah.
And I don't have the answer to that.
They will just get fried just by living. Just by existing, they're expending so many calories and being so active all the time. That is very true. And if you watch them, even just like having a chat, they'll be like moving. They'll just be like hopping and skipping and swaying and just wandering around. They're so often absolutely still when they're little. I'd say before the age of like 10.
Thanks to everybody that's rating and reviewing on Spotify and iTunes. It really helps us to find new listeners and share what we're doing with more and more people. Lots of that neat, is it called neat movement? That like neat movement is all the little stuff that you do, bouncing your leg or, flicking your head backwards and forwards or doing like that stuff that builds up. So the overarching thing of the first half of this book I found really interesting is this guy is unpicking, I don't know if you've read it, the book Born to Run.
Nope.
So massive book in the like fitness and obviously particularly the running community. This guy went to go, and not this author, a different author called Christopher McDougall, went to see the Tarahumara tribes in South America who run 70-mile like marathons for fun, right? And barefoot, and they don't ever get injured, and they run them into their like 60s, and they do this crazy stuff, and he's had amazing success, and people have gone and done this stuff, and this author makes a comparison. So he says he went to go and visit the Tarahumara people, and he's talking about how like it's increasingly hard to go and visit genuine hunter-gatherer things, like communities, because they are moving more and more to an academic tourism model where there are people who just host scientists. That is how they make money. And so then you're losing the hunter-gatherer thing because people keep coming to stay. It's very interesting.
Yes. So, and also I've read some stuff recently that says it's not actually correct to study sort of people who are living in a tribal way now and then just assume and extrapolate those observations and go, well, that's how all of humankind has existed all over the world at all times. Like that is just not factual. It's not accurate. Because there are so many variables, including what you've said. That's really interesting that that kind of like, way of life might be being preserved for the sake of that income stream and that observation, and that actually, there's a weird historical, this is completely off topic, there's a weird historical thing, which is where in ancient Greece, one of the ways that Sparta kept going as a name and a place for as long as it did was that people from the other city-states in Greece would go and visit Sparta, and the Spartans would put on a show of training,
and pretend like, oh, we're beating the Warriors. Oh, and then people would go, wow, they beat the Warriors there. They're so amazing. And like, they weren't doing the shit. It was, anyway, this is a side thing. So this guy goes to visit the Tarahumara to just go, this is insane. This goes against all my research. I need to go and see these people. And he goes there and he says that this race that they do, that's 70 odd miles, is something they do once a year. And he said it's the equivalent of going to Hawaii on the day that they run the Ironman competition and watching all the Ironman athletes and then coming home and going, do you know the people in Hawaii, they every day they cycle 20 miles and they swim for an hour and then they run for, and like, he sort of goes, these people do that once a year and the rest of the year is sitting around. They do I've got it written down. It's like 2 to 3 hours of light exercise and 2 to 3 hours of moderate exercise a day, which is quite a lot. But says the vast majority of their time is walking to a place and then either sitting to gather things like grubs, roots, tubers, those things, or sitting and crafting, sitting and making, sitting and cooking. And it is all done like communally. And I think there's a massive parallel there for forest school in terms of how much we show children, particularly children, like running in sessions or going on swings in sessions or like competing in obstacle courses in sessions. And like that makes such great Instagrammable social media content. And so then the narrative in people's mind becomes that like forest school is super active. And also that thing that I know I've been guilty of, and not guilty of, that I have done in the past, which is like, if I keep them busy, they are easier to manage. The group is easier to manage when you're like, okay, first off, hide and seek. Then we're going to play obstacle course challenge. Then after that, we're all going to run down to the pond. Then we're going to do this. And like, and thinking that that is somehow more natural, more primal, more like, that's what they need. That's what they'd be doing anyway. They want that. And reflecting maybe back on how much of that stuff was actually about me and about me going like, you will tire before I do. And like, that's a thing I've got. And then
that is interesting. Yeah.
And then thinking about the groups that we have now, where we have really developed that like child-centered, learner-led, whatever you want to call it, thing. Actually, if you take these people, so he goes and sees like the Hadza people in Africa, and he's like, yeah, they're sitting around, they're doing crafting and tubers and whatever. Over a 6-hour day in our sessions, I would say the majority of it is spent sitting around, and it might not seem, but it's like sitting around planning for the war, or sitting around, in the hammocks discussing what the rules of the game are going to be. Actually, the bursts of energy are very short through the day, and I'm not sure that I've reflected to this. You disagree?
I think I might disagree with you there.
Go on.
I think that I don't know if this book kind of more scientifically divides types of activity and gives those a name in terms of, but I would say if you're literally talking about sitting down, sitting or reclining, so sitting on your butt or lying down, which could be on a bench, on a hammock, wherever, as being like a low energy activity. And then you've got medium energy activities, which is the stuff that I was just saying about, like, yeah, you might be chatting and planning, but you're doing that as you walk about or as you climb a tree or as you're kind of, it's almost like a kind of absent-minded kind of activity. Do you know? But that's the wrong phrase to use, but that's the one that comes to mind because the movement is not the point.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? I'm describing like if you just kind of did our session is halfway through the day.
Like incidental movement.
Yeah, incidental. So if you just did like a little scan over the woods and who's doing what, yeah, most people are talking. Not everyone's talking. Some people might be playing by themselves, but it is that kind of like not running, not going fastest person to the end of the obstacle course is the winner. It's not
that's
like
really rare.
that's the high energy thing. That is the movement is the point, or like the animal game. That is we are all running away from you and you have to catch us and put us there, or you have to sneak up on us and surprise us. That's, that the movement is the point. It's like the main reason for existing at that time. And then this huge bit in the middle, which is incidental movement, where if you almost like tapped someone on the shoulder and said, what are you doing right now? And they'd be like, I'm chatting about the rules of the game. Like, no, but with your body, like, what are you doing? And they go, oh, I guess I'm like balancing on this beam that's tied to the tree. Why are you doing that then? Don't know, just fancy it. What are you doing right now? I'm hanging upside down on the gymnastics thing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and I think that's the difference. That's going back to what we said before about children and adults. The adults don't do that so much. Adults are, as you say, more calorie cautious, so they're doing less of the kind of just incidental big body movements. You might be fiddling with something or doing something else, but you're going to be on your butt. So that's what I think is happening mostly.
I think that's
that
what
middle
I think we're saying the same thing. Maybe I overemphasize the like sitting still bit of it. I think it's not high intensity in any way. The activity is low level. It's probably the same level like this anthropology like thing is looking at as walking and picking berries as you go, or weaving fibers together. It's that level of movement rather than, and I think that's what I'm saying about like that thing of maybe the perception is that forest school is like hiking and adventures, and that's like it's like an elevated thing, whereas that's what learners like crave and need, and that's what the pedagogy is. And that actually it's very interesting to me that given the space, I think the behavior and the level of movement that we see maps onto this anthropological. And even when we've done sessions with adults, it moves to that like, we enjoyed the running thing, but actually we quite like pottering around, bit of bimbling, to use some very British words.
Do you think, going back to what you're saying about like how you might have planned a session back in the day, the olden days when you were but a young hobbit in the forest and you'd not, and you're kind of newer to forest school, I definitely agree. Like I hadn't made that observation until you pointed it out, that nearer the beginning of our journey, the sessions were more high energy because we had planned them that way. And now I'm just thinking about planning, and I'm just thinking about like the high energy stuff does still happen, but it usually happens when we haven't planned it. It has spontaneously occurred, or the learners have come up with, we are going to play this high intensity energy game. And that actually, I mean, we've talked about this before when we've done podcasts about wide games. Haven't we? But I think a few years ago, you and I both would have planned a lot more high energy wide games, usually at the beginning of a session, and then again halfway through, and then maybe again to wrap up the day. And that we have kind of learned through experience that isn't always successful, at least with our groups, that they want to do the high energy stuff, but they want to do it on their own terms. They want to make the rules. They want to decide when they do it, which completely makes sense, doesn't it? It's like, if you are going to, if you're looking at it in terms of, I'm expending calories, and it is, even if kids aren't conscious of that, the human body is like, okay, right, so I'm doing this really high energy intense thing, and emotionally intense as well, because they are younger, and there's that whole sort of emotional and imaginative investment in that type of activity. It's really high cost in both of those areas, both in terms of calories and in terms of like emotional expenditure. So it makes complete sense that they would want to do that on their own terms, as opposed to having an adult go, right, now we're going to play this game of like capture the flag, and it's going to be really intense, and yes, there's a jail, and you have to, do you know what I mean? All those things. And we have kind of gone down the road of like, we don't plan those big games and those high intensity things as much, even in terms of when we used to do the lightning rodding thing of like, can you catch me? Or it's the kids versus the adults. Like we don't do, and I think that part of that is the long-term nature of our groups, that they know that they can say no to us. Whereas if we had an entirely new group, we might still plan that in, and they'd go, okay, yeah, sure, we're doing that. Yeah, fine. We're going to run around till we're really flipping tired right at the beginning of the session.
Yeah.
But now the groups will tell us, no, I don't want to do that. Like,
Yeah.
are you playing? No, I'm not playing either. I'm just going to, sit around.
You will never need to go back to mundane marshmallows ever again. My book, Forest School Cooking, covers everything from how to build ovens to cooking in new and exciting ways, and a whole load of easy and amazing recipes that your groups will love. Order your copy today on Amazon. And the second one involves more social and emotional coaching and skill building, and like I do think that is, at least for my part, I do think it was largely about like if I do wide games and I give it everything like a children's TV presenter, then, you know, especially some of them were like shorter sessions, you know, like a 2-hour Saturday morning session. You're like, I can blast this for 2 hours and then we don't have to get into the nitty gritty, or if a game falls apart, we're straight into the next one, guys, let's do this thing. And nobody think too hard and nobody get really deep. And you're not like relationship building because it's just about points or it's about attacking this bit. And like, actually, when you pull back from that stuff, that's when loads of social and emotional stuff comes out. And that's harder to coach through and to teach, because you're sitting there going, okay, we're walking on a log and we're chatting about this stuff and we're negotiating how we fit. And that's so much more beneficial in the long run for the learners than it is to go, what did you get out of Forest School? We used to run around for 2 hours and which is great to, you know, all those things of burn off some steam and get out and do those things. But like, that's what it is. It's a pressure valve. Yeah. And you don't need a pressure valve over and over again.
No.
You need to develop some other stuff.
It almost like it's a pressure valve for a bit, but then if you carry on doing it, it's actually creating more cortisol, more adrenaline. I don't know the kind of. Does your book say anything about that? About like hormones and emotional states?
Not necessarily. There is a bit at the end of the book, which actually I'll jump to because I really disagreed with some of this book. Towards the end, they talk about, so this is relevant. So talking about exercise anthropologically is a social event. So if you think about hunting or even that moderate stuff of like gathering or social activities like dancing or going for a big run together, that you would rarely find people doing that on their own, and that the rewards are social and physical, either their food or their like group, you know, community building. And then he goes on for a bit about libertarian paternalism.
Okay, love it. Go on, explain what that is.
Oh God,
It sounds like the most hateful thing in the universe, but please explain.
Okay, so the way this author describes it talks about shaping the environment towards healthy choices, but not discounting any other choices. So you still would have the example being like, you know, that thing where they made the stairs out of a subway station play musical notes. Okay. And so people will start using the stairs and they go, oh, that's fun. But there's still an escalator next to it if you want to use the escalator. And so going, like, he argues that is a government or society or its role to go, this is healthy for you. So we will make it enticing, but we won't force you. Which is very interesting, I think, because I think that gets into my brain about place-based design. Or
that's actually less bad than I thought it was going to be.
Okay, right. But then let me read you a quote, because this is the challenging bit. That's not the challenging bit. Sure. This is the challenging bit. He talks about then motivation and more of this stuff. Students in my university pay a fortune to have professors like me compel them to read, study, and work under the penalty of getting bad grades or failing. These students compete for and agree to these conditions because they know they would not learn as much without the school's nudges, shoves, and requirements. So he frames it as like the students have paid to come to a place so that you will motivate them with sticks,
Mm.
which is a weird take on, like, maybe not weird, but it's a very new take for me on external motivation, to be like, people want me to externally motivate them. And I'm not sure that I agree that that
Ooh,
is why
that's
all students
interesting.
go. And then it's
So is he then extrapolating that out to physical activity that
yeah,
people should be
yeah.
basically forced to do, but through nudges and pokes?
So he talks a little bit about a company in Sweden where the boss mandates that everybody does. It's like HIIT cardio every day from 10 till 11. Everyone in the company does it. And when the guy took over, half the company quit, but the people that stayed now feel like they love it and they're all really healthy. And he's sort of saying that, like, that should be the role of schools. He likens it to, you know, the fact that physical education is mandatory for children. So we do have this in place already for children in schools.
That's
physical
true.
education is mandatory. And he is arguing at this point that it should be the role of employers and businesses to mandate exercise from their employees.
That's interesting, because I was just thinking about, so in the last couple of years, I've started doing way more exercise and strength training. And the person who runs that has said to me before about, she has looked into the science and psychology of this world, and has said that you do, you know, she was talking about doing things for free. And she was like, I wouldn't ever do things for free, like run a boot camp, for example, or like, you know, an exercise session in a park. Even if I was funded to do that, because people don't invest in it unless they have something in there. They've got skin in the game.
Yeah.
They've signed up. They've paid some money, even if it's a small amount of money.
Yeah.
But it needs to be the right amount of money, that it doesn't feel insubstantial enough to not show up. Yeah. And that also you've got some accountability. So basically agreeing with what your man is saying, that you know, and even still, she'll do like programs for people, and she'll make a spreadsheet, and she'll say, do this exercise followed by this, and every week fill it in, and I'm going to look at it. I look at it on Sunday night.
Some accountability stuff.
It's accountability, and it is that kind of motivation. And I mean, I definitely work that way. I've tried so many times in my life, not just with exercise, but with other things, like, oh yeah, I'm going to form this new habit. I'm going to form this new routine. I know it's good for me. And I know it makes me even feel happy and feel good. And I feel so proud when I've done it. But unless I've got some, accountability or skin in the game in terms of like a financial commitment, then it just doesn't stick. So I kind of see where he's coming from.
I see where he's coming from. I think this is where it splits. His book is not aimed at children. His book is aimed at adults. And I think I can see it from the point of view of adults and the world, and creating worlds where healthy choices are encouraged, or setting things up like that. You know, I'm all for, like you, accountability buddies and systems and things like that. I think it is not so easy to talk about when you're talking about children.
Yes, I agree.
And that's where we're I'm taking his work and applying. So he's not, I don't think, saying anything heinous in this book. But if I then take it into the forest school world, into a children's world, I think that is different and requires adapting.
Well, yeah, because then you go down that line of like, if we accept that, you know, exercise is good. And I don't know if he kind of touches on the kind of, very hot topic of like childhood obesity and childhood, diabetes and all that kind of stuff. So if you accept that being active, even in a moderate way, is like extremely beneficial, and that most children don't get the opportunity to do that enough, because we can see that in the kind of, in the sort of health information about children and young people. But it's that idea of it being forced. And if you also look at, would we feel comfortable going, no, everyone has to play this game, and some people will run sessions like that, and we'll go, no, we're all doing this now, and you all have to run. It's like, how do you factor in not just personal preference, but disability and different levels of fitness, and how people emotionally feel about that, and all those kind of things. And then you think, okay, like you just pointed out about PE in schools. Well, they do that to children in schools. So if I don't feel comfortable saying that, in a forest school session, no, you all absolutely have to do this. But everyone is forced to do, not everyone, but in some schools, everyone will be forced to do cross-country running or football or whatever. And that surely there's some kind of halfway
rarely scaled as well. I think
exactly.
PE is
There's
rarely
no choice.
scaled.
It's
the differentiation that you see in an English lesson or a maths lesson is very different to any differentiation you'd see in a PE lesson.
Yeah.
I think my experience anyway, I'm not throwing PE teachers under the bus there. My experience is that people might differentiate for skill in terms of like, oh, okay, you guys are in the football club, so you go do this drill and you practice this one. But in terms of like cardiovascular health or anything like that, my education experience was never like, okay, you guys only have to run half the cross country track because you guys are shit at it,
or stuff about coordination, for example. It's like you're all just playing tennis, so just play tennis. It's like I can't actually hit the ball in any way. Are you going to give me some other activity to do that builds my skills? You get a fucking
huge racket. Here's your differentiation. Yours is the size of a bin lid.
That is what I needed.
And then you go down and down. The best kids have got a ping pong bat, and they're fucking going for it.
Exactly. And there's no shame. No one's allowed to feel any shame. That's forbidden.
Well, no, you wouldn't, because those kids have got a bin lid.
I imagine in my fancy world, my fancy world where I talk about how education is all perfect and it's all amazing and it's all my ideas, because my ideas are always right. So in this fancy world, I agree with your man that I think that during a school day or a working day, there is like an hour of exercise time and you are paid for that, or it's like scheduled in and you have to do it, but you can do whatever you want. You can do
making notes of this. What do I have to force you to do?
Okay, you have to employ a yoga teacher.
I'm not doing that.
A cross-country person, running person. You have to get some, or like a plethora of lovely physical activities that you could do. But do you know what? The internet is a magical thing. And you could have people, Yoga with Adrian, she's a goddess of the internet. She does like a streaming yoga class, but it's not live, but you sign up to it live. Do you know what I mean? So she recorded it whenever, but it starts at 1:00 and you can see that lots of other people have also joined. I don't think you can see them, but you're all doing it at the same time. So you get that vibe.
That's that social thing. That's the social thing.
Exactly.
Exercise is social.
Yeah. And so you could do that. You could make use of the internet for virtual teachers almost to be doing these kind of activities. But it's like, we're all doing that and no one's coming back to work/lessons or whatever until this time. This is your physical time in whatever way works for you.
Okay. We've solved that one. We've solved it.
Cheap and easy. It's fine.
Right. I'm going to slightly change a bit now. There's a bit talking about sleep. So I found really interesting because this book is looking at that mix of exercise and sleep and rest and all this stuff. So, the non-industrialized cultures that this guy went to look at, like Amish cultures and hunter-gatherer tribes and all these things, sleep on average 6.5 to 7 hours a day. And he makes the point that is counter to a lot of what is told to us, which is that like post-industrialization in the West, like we don't sleep enough. We should be getting 8 hours. Electric lights have ruined us all and we don't know how to sleep. And that's not enough, describing these things. It talks about how like sleeping lightly and in staggered bouts is all to do with like group safety. And this one for me was really interesting. There's a bit talking about, because when I was thinking about these things, I was thinking about like, I have been baby wearing for like the last 5 years in the woods with my children. And so I have done that thing of like, do I try and put them in a hammock that's slightly away from the camp, or do I, just leave them on my back and let them fall asleep there, or do all of those different things. And there's a bit in this book where he's talking about sleeping in a solitary way in the dark is evolutionarily so abnormal that you are probably sleeping in inverted commas better than any of the royalty that you can name in history.
Mm.
And that this idea that like to sleep, humans need a dark, quiet room is an absolute fallacy. And he talks about how actually what we are, I don't want to say programmed, what we are like predisposed to is that the sound of a campfire and the sound of people talking is what makes your brain go, people are watching the camp, it is safe for me to sleep. And I find that really interesting because I have to have podcasts, videos, something going on to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And I feel awful about it. And I feel like, oh, my sleep hygiene's no good. And why can't I just shut my brain? If I shut my brain off, and I've always, part of it is if I turn that stuff off, I have to hear my own thoughts. And God, I don't want to hear them. Like they can fuck right off. They're not welcome.
The same as me.
Right. But also, it's very reassuring to have that thing that says, that is a safety mechanism in your brain that says if people are awake and talking, then it's safe for me to sleep. And talking then about, that thing of people being night owls, people being early risers, and that staggered sleep is super important for us and has been important for so long. And that we just go, don't need that anymore. You're all useless if you don't sleep at the time when we decree. So I think, because lots of us run forest school sessions with children in early years where like napping and sleeping is still a vital part of their development. And even through I've had 12-year-olds fall asleep on me, like in my lap. I've had a 12-year-old, like I was holding him like a baby for a joke and he fell asleep on me. And so I think sometimes sleep is not necessarily something we think of as part of the forest school experience. Again, because maybe there's that narrative of like forest school is children in puddle suits running towards the camera while plinky plonk xylophones play. And kind of going, okay, so what does sleep look like in the outdoors? And lots of other places like outdoor nurseries and stuff around the world have got these like great things of, kids sleeping in -5 outside, or kids, up in hammocks or whatever. But I don't think we necessarily see much of it in the UK, or I don't, at least. So I found that really interesting to think about sleep, and particularly like rest and downtime, that it is very normal. Again, that kind of just going back to that thing of like hammering people with high intensity activity and going like, it's not something to phone home about. It's not something to like make loads of notes about. That like someone having a doze. My daughter is obsessed with the idea that I mentioned a few months ago, that when it was super hot here in the UK, and we told all the kids that we were going to have a siesta, an intentional siesta after lunch. And now my daughter repeatedly after lunch, she's like, do we need a siesta after lunch today? She's 4. But she's like, do we need that today? Do we need it? Like, the building that into the routine of the day, that, option, not forcing it, but that option of like, just go, you might doze off. That's all right. Not us. We can't do that. Right. No matter how much we might want to have a little doze in the middle of the day, that's not something we can do. But I thought that was really interesting. Applications for Forest School leader training at Children of the Forest are now open. Come and learn with me and Wem at our private woodland down in Devon. Find out more by heading to myforestschooltraining.co.uk. See you there.
Yeah, normalising it, that's an okay choice. That's a valid thing to do. Although, the other bit that was in this was teenagers who sleep less than 6 hours have twice the injury rate of their peers who sleep for 8 hours or more. Wow.
Isn't that interesting? So specifically talking about teenagers there, and thinking about teenagers out in the woods, and how often you and I have, not teenagers specifically, but how often you and I have made a welfare call with groups of adults or with groups of children where we've gone, the tools need to go away now because something is gone. You are all too tired, or like this is not right to do anymore.
And like the end of the day activities that we had to do. So especially when it began to get really hot this summer, in the earlier summer, it's now not hot at all. But we noticed that people were falling over smashing into stuff, all
Oh
this
my
kind of thing.
God.
At the end of the day,
Last 10 minutes of
it's the
the
last time of
sessions.
the day that like just the injuries were just mental. So like, right, we're just not going to, even though people are showing us, this is the flip side of it in terms of like the instinct is there for this like full on games of chase at 10-3. And we're going to encourage that not to happen by going, oh, we're just going to stay up by the gate. Let's play this other game of, giants, dwarves, or wizards or whatever. It's just because
But
people
we weren't
are
being
tired.
sneaky about it. I think that sounds like we were being slightly sneaky and underhand, but actually we were going, hey, have you noticed that people keep getting hurt at the end? I wonder if we can do anything to, we weren't being deceitful in that thing. But also, for people listening, that's why you need a near miss book, and you look for patterns and you follow your patterns. This is why training is important, and you can't just go, oh, yeah, just take some kids out of the way. You need to be keeping the log of these things so you can do your reflections and go, do you realize 3 people have broken their arm at exactly the same time in the day? At exactly the same. They didn't, 3 people have broken their arm. But do you know what I mean? You see those patterns. Like, that is why observation and record keeping is important.
Yeah.
Okay.
The teenage thing is very interesting, isn't it? And I wonder how, knowing that and maybe knowing a little bit about if you're running teenage groups mixed age with teenagers there, sort of checking in with people to get a rough idea about how much sleep a teenager might have had that night before the session or whatever. And then, normalizing that downtime and providing lots of kind of soft spaces where people can physically relax, lots of hammocks, lots of blankets and pillows and things like that. If you don't have pillows as a loose part in your space, heartily recommend. Oh my gosh. Like all those kind of threads on Facebook forums and stuff where people go, oh, what, I'm starting up, I've got a budget from my setting for forest school equipment, what should I buy? I never bother to comment, but I always want to say pillows and blankets because they get so much use in our setting. They're in a box, waterproof box where the kids can access them all the time, and they come out every day in some way, whether it be like some people have invented a really physical game or activity, and they are doing their own risk assessments, and they're like, I need to put a pillow on that sort of hard surface there on the ground, or making dens and making it cozy inside, or it's raining. That's a big popular one, isn't it? It's raining and we want to make basically a bedroom under the parachute, like a huge group bed. And that's so sweet. I love it. Yes, I mean, my son is getting into that teenage phase. It's really quite weird. So he's 11 and he's just started sleeping in, and it's really weird. It's like, where is he? Is he oh my god, he's still asleep? What is this? It's really weird because it used to be that no matter what time he went to bed, he'd always be up at like 6:30, 7, no matter how many hours he had in bed. My kids are like that.
It doesn't matter when they go down.
Exactly. But now he'll still be like asleep.
I want to show you. Do you know what? I will put some pictures on the Patreon for this. But as we're talking about it, I'm going to hold up. You can see these photos of the Hadza people and where they sleep.
Wow.
And so this person is sleeping with their head on a rock. These are some children. There, you see that?
Yeah.
And again, talking about that like normality of that is how humans sleep. I will put that picture on the Patreon. So I want to talk about being aggressive.
Okay.
I want to talk about, because you're fucking winding me up. No. I talked to you already about this, about in this book, and they talk about reactive and proactive aggression. And I bloody love it. This is my new little like jingle jam jag. Oh, yum, yum, yum. So reactive aggression is that thing of you are holding some. Oh, did you hear that?
No.
It's that horrible big burp that came out of me.
Thankfully, Zoom saved me from that.
Zoom is being very kind to your ears.
It really is.
Reactive. Look, we'll cut all this shit out. Right. Reactive aggression is that thing. If you're holding something and I take it off you, that your reactive aggression is punching me in the face, right? Which is like a thing that all animals might do. If like they're eating something and they get nudged out of the way, it's a bite at your sibling, or if it's you know, that sort of those scraps that you see lions have, or those things where it's like, you have wronged me, fuck you, and come back. And proactive aggression. So they talk about in this book that like reactive aggression is the thing that we, aside from not all, but a lot of other animals, we have trained ourselves out of. Like, we encourage that out of our young, and that we as a species are less and less reactively aggressive. And that is part of our like pro-social thing. And then if I take that work and I drop it into forest school, and we talk about like reactive aggression, and hey, I was in that hammock, or I didn't like it when you tagged me. Like, I don't think there's any issues with saying that we are encouraging people to control their reactionary aggression. Would you say that's right? Which is great. Then they talk about proactive aggression, which is like, it's almost like premeditative aggression, which they describe in a paleontological anthropological. God, it's too many syllables.
Yeah, we know.
In that, right? They talk about it being like setting up an ambush, or sneaking up on an animal from 4 different directions, or planning a murder, or all those things that require forethought and planning, strategy, right? And saying that basically anything that involves a weapon, any like human death that involves a weapon, is an example of proactive aggression, because you have to have had the weapon in your hand. So it's rare, not impossible, but rare, that you are accidentally walking with a weapon. You're walking with a weapon with some strategic intent here, that like, I'm ready to defend myself if something happens, right? And this book goes into stuff where they talk about like dispelling this myth that some people, this sort of thing that's going around, that's like, oh, well, pre-agriculture, hunter-gatherers were all egalitarian and there were no disputes, because if there was a disagreement, you just move on. You just move on to the next place. You just, you know, there's no competition for these things. Resources are abundant. Everybody lives in harmony. And then they go through, and then they find these like examples of like a burial site in Iran that's 60,000 years old. It's way pre-agriculture. And there's like pregnant women and their children in there who have been stabbed, and their hands are bound. So this is like this is a strategic, thought out thing. And talking about then that we, through the time now, have basically developed sports as a way to do both of that reaction control and proactive aggression, like encouragement. So they talk about most sporting games involve being strategic, having like your side versus another side, possibly the introduction of like tools, or like whether that's a club or a bat or a ball or something that involves doing those things. And that also the rules parts of games are us displaying to our community that we can control that reactionary aggression when wronged, which I find really interesting. If I think about major league sports now, I'm not sure the reactionary control is there a lot of
I was
the time.
just thinking the same thing. I was like, so where does the player effing and jeffing at the referee, or shoving someone out, dirty tackling someone, where does that fit in that theory?
But it's interesting, isn't it, culturally, I think. And also then
that's the aim. That's the aim of sport.
Maybe it was. I think it's fairer to say that was the aim, right? And maybe we've moved beyond. But
it's still punished, isn't it, if it happens?
True.
And like there was that boxer in was it in the Olympics recently, or the one before, who did lose it, absolutely lost it. And I think when the referee had like called a break or whatever,
right,
just punched the crap out of the other person.
Oh, right.
Oh, yeah, and was like banned, if not forever, for a long time. But just, very publicly on TV, just absolutely went, no. But But yeah, usually, even if somebody does lose control, they get their red card or their penalty or whatever, lose the points, and that sort of conforms to that.
Yeah,
That is not okay. That aggression is not okay. It needs to be within these parameters.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It really, I found it. I don't think I found it challenging. I found it interesting that you could say, with this reactive and proactive aggression thing in mind, that you could say that at Forest School we do encourage and facilitate aggression.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? That sounds like one of those things you would never. God, I hope I don't say it on any like recording or anything that goes out anywhere, because that would be a bloody nightmare. But you could, in theory, say that, and you wouldn't be wrong.
Yes. And how are you defining aggression?
What do you mean?
Well, I'm just thinking back to, I feel like I talk about this incident every single time I talk about Forest School. So I apologise, listeners, if you've heard this about 20,000 times. But when I was doing pop-up Forest School at a primary school, I've been doing it for quite a while, and I just set up loads of play invitations before the class came out. And I think it was like a mixed reception year 1, year 2 class. And one of the invitations I put out was a bucket with a long rope attached to it, and I'd flinged the rope over the branch of the tree. And the kids came out, and loads of them congregated again around this thing. And half of the group were pulling the rope with the bucket, and the other half were pulling the rope without the bucket. And they were shouting and heaving and pulling, using lots of big muscles. And I was like, this is so interesting. This is amazing. And I was observing from one part of the school field, and I noticed that the teacher and teaching assistant were observing from a different part. And so they were talking and watching. And I went up to them and I was like, oh, it's so interesting, isn't it? Really reveling in like, this is such an interesting play type. What's going on? And their take on it was, yeah, you see, this is the trouble with this class. Whenever we allow free play, this is what happens. They just get so aggressive. And they were really like, this is not okay. They are out of control. But when I went closer, the things they were shouting were, no, you go this way. We need more people on our team. No, all pull together. You know what I mean? It's that kind of going to that workplay thing we talk about. But, you know, they weren't going, you effing...
Oh, thanks for not swearing. Thank you.
God, they weren't... I don't know. It's about how you define aggression. They were shouting loudly, and they were using big muscle groups. And they, you know, if one team had pulled really hard, the other team might have got pulled over and hurt, but they weren't pulling hard enough for that to happen, and nobody did get hurt. So how do you define, you know, and they weren't kind of going, we're going to steal it from you, it's ours. They were, I don't know.
I think you could take that though, and you could say that, and maybe this is a better description of like reactionary aggression. True reactionary aggression in that scenario would have been if one team had done a big yank, right? And the team that had the rope yanked out of their hands went over and punched the other team. Yeah. Like physically assaulted them, or like screamed in their face, or did a thing. Because that is outside the realms of the game. It becomes proactive aggression because it was inside the realms of the game. And I think there's an interesting thing where I think about how many games involve both teams trying to be proactively aggressive in order to create a scenario. This is really high end, right? So apologize.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Right. It involves one team being proactively aggressive in order to create a scenario in which the other team has to control their reactionary aggression. Yeah. That is all games. That is, we have scored strategically, and now you have to not hit us because we've scored. That is, I've tagged you, and you have to not scream at me because I've tagged you. That is, we have found your hiding spot, and that's finding your hiding spot is proactive aggression. That is like hunting and seeking and finding. And now you have to control your reactionary aggression. It is one team making the other team. And so in some games, you have the roles and they're set. And that's where I think sometimes it can be challenging. If you are the seekers and the finders, the seekers and the hiders, then as the hiders, your only role is to control your reactions. And if you're like in a game where, and this is where I think you and I have talked before about with wide games, where we don't have games where you're out. We don't have games where you're like, and that's it, you go sit down. Because when you're in fixed roles, I'm working this out as I talk and I'm really enjoying it. When you have fixed roles, it doesn't seem that you don't have an outlet for your aggression. When you have games where you move, like once your tail is caught in Hunters and Rabbits, you put it on your head, and now you have an outlet, which is that you can be strategically aggressive. The scenarios where I have seen the most fallout have been where someone has had to control their reactionary aggression and not had an outlet to be strategically aggressive.
Yeah.
And I've talked in a very weird way there.
No, I get it. I completely get it. What I want to do, what I want to say as a further point to that is kind of going back to that story about the bucket and the rope and the tree, is I wonder whether our sort of lens for seeing those different types of aggression is sort of on a bit of a scale or a continuum. So those probably who are working in forest school, our lens or our sensitivity to the differences between those two types of aggression is actually quite honed. We have a lot of practice at going, oh, that sounds a bit rough. I'm going to go and investigate. Oh, no, actually, I'm not going to intervene there because I can see that this is...
Yeah. I'm with you.
You know, they're working things out and and it is a challenge for them to hold in that reactionary aggression, but they're doing it right now. And I'm here in case they lose the ability to do that, or it just that muscle isn't quite honed, trained enough, it just gives out. But that people who don't work with learners very often in free play aren't very used to, and again, is in that education role or that parental role, the adult looking after children, part of our role is to help them learn to control reactionary aggression
and see the granularity between those things. Yeah,
but I just don't know if most of us have enough practice at that, and also, have we ever had enough practice at that? Because a lot of the time, in sort of history, that kind of play would be away from adult eyes. So it actually be down to the kids to, decide amongst themselves who's stepping over the line into reactionary aggression and how are they going to deal with it. In my childhood, it was like I had a war going on with the Black Lawn Boys from the next door housing estate, the Black Lawn Boys. And did
they have a Black Lawn? Sorry, I really need to know.
That was the name of the housing estate. It was called Black Lawn.
Oh, okay.
I don't know why. It was like a new.
It's not like a family of arsonists.
No. No. But the Black Lawn Boys. The terror was real,
I'm sure.
One of them chucked my bike basically off a cliff. It wasn't a cliff, it was just like a mound of mud on this building site. But actually, just as hard as he could threw my bike down thing. And then I was like, right, well, you could have broken my bike. He didn't. But I was like, I hate you and I'm going to kill you. So we used to make balls of mud and dry them in the sun. And we had this den. And then we would be wanging these hardened, basically cannonballs out of clay at them as hard as we could, trying to hit them. And they'd be stamping on the roof. It was like a full-on war. No adults around.
Right, because this is recorded. And I think we need to stop your testimony at this point.
So scared. Anyway, so some people... I think there's that as we talk about risk and healthy risk. That's huge, isn't it? That is part of risky play. Is that the people you're playing with could actually lose control and actually verge into reactionary aggression, and that's the risk.
Yes.
But that a lot of children don't get the opportunity to explore that kind of world for a long enough time, and if they do, then an adult might come along and go, no, this is not okay, because they misjudge the types of aggression or mislabel them.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Well, yeah, I know what you mean. Okay. Sidestep. this is quite interesting. Actually, I made a note of this, and this is no. Do you know the oldest clam in the world was dredged and killed just to prove that it was 507 years old? What was the only way they could work out how old it was they were like, this thing's fucking old, so let's get it out and chop it up.
I'm sorry. What has this got to do with anything?
What? Okay. So this has to do with, they're talking about in this book about like senescence and aging.
Yeah.
And so to link it back to, there's a bit at the start of this book where they're talking about the negative effects of sitting.
Yeah.
Right. And they talk about the fact that the negative effects of sitting can't be outweighed by what's the like discrete bouts of exercise. So they have this thing where it's like people who sit in an office for a whole day and then go and just sit at home, or people that go and sit in an office and then go to the gym for 2 hours and then go home. And the people that went to the gym had like increased cardiovascular health, increased muscle mass, but had no decrease in the markers of like illness and death related to sitting, basically. Right. Because the way they describe it is like you need to turn your car engine over periodically to stop it from seizing up. Periodically, squatting, standing, light movement wakes up our muscles and contributes to all the mechanisms that monitor and like level our blood sugar and our fat storage.
Okay.
So they were saying that it is to do with that thing of standing up for 10 minutes every hour, squatting, moving that thing. And so I think that's hugely relevant to working with young people in forest school and in education broadly, in that idea of like the discrete 20 minutes of playtime or the discrete bit of lunch is not the same as moving their bodies during the day. And for us as adults, like moving our bodies during the day. So then I'm getting back to the clam, I promise. Then they talk about later in the book, talking about the grandmother hypothesis. Do you know this thing?
Rings a bell, but tell me.
That grandmothers are like uniquely important in human society because we are one of the only animals that doesn't like I'm going to phrase this in like the most tactful way that I can think of right now in this moment.
Do you mean reproduce and then die?
We don't just keel over once we stop being able to have babies, right?
Yeah.
And talking about this like self-selecting thing that grandmothers could continue to hunt, gather food for either the mothers or the children, allowing and so then it self-selects in terms of like, if you have that and your babies have a higher likelihood of surviving, and on and on and on. And saying that as people age, the Hadza people that this guy is studying in part of the book, they're like 60, 70-year-olds have basically the same walking speed as their 20-year-olds. But in the Western Europe, Western educated, industrialized world, it drops off dramatically. And that this like Western idea of like retirement is actually what starts to slow us down, that we stop turning the engine over, basically. And that this like constant but low level movement is what's super important. And again, that kind of goes right back to what we were talking about at the start, with the kids doing this like constant low level movement. They're ticking things over. They're just going like, and then they talk about these people where they're doing these like endurance events, like the 70-mile runs or the, and he said that sometimes we think about that as a like weird tribal, what an extreme thing, that must be a cultural thing. And he talks about how dance throughout human history is the way that we practice movement. You're holding up your doodles. Saying that like dancing is the thing that keeps us going. And then he talks about like the Hadza people have these like, it says between 12 and 24-hour dance events where they
Amazing.
just get into this like stupor and like move, and that is building up all the like walking muscles, but without having to like do walking. And then he's like, and that is not massively different to Jane Austen writing that she danced with Mr. Darcy until the morning. And it's like, you might think of dance as this weird, abstract, like, oh, okay, it's round the fire. It's that recapitulative play thing. But it has stayed in our, you know, physiology. Oh, there's so much more I could talk about. But we're kind of pressed for time, aren't we?
Yeah.
I'm
down with that though. More dancing.
More dancing.
I bloody love dancing.
And we did some dancing the other week, didn't we? We like woke up the ground because we were doing some bits where we like bounced on our heels, and I got I want to get a bass drum. I want to get the bass drum from a drum kit, and
the neighbours will love that.
We don't have any neighbours. Squirrels. I don't mean here. I mean in the woods. I want to take you to the woods. I just
remembered the time that one of our neighbours did say they are always having raves up there or something. It's not for a school, it's
We're having a rave because there was a drum for 5 minutes at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Exactly.
Ooh, what a rave it was.
Exactly.
When we are going to talk about in the Patreon episode this week,
holiday clubs,
top tips, things that we've tried that worked, things that we've tried that haven't worked but might work for you. And we want to say thank you to our lovely patrons, to Rosie and Julie and Rachel and Emma and Candice and Sarah and Claire and Heidi and Louise and Michael and Anna. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for supporting us. If you want to find out how to support us, you can head to patreon.com/Children of the Forest. So you can listen to all of these episodes without adverts. You can listen to the bonus episodes that we do. And it just really helps to support everything that we're doing. If you are going to the Forest School Conference this year at Danbury in October, then we are going to be there. And we've got, we're planning some party games and some meeting and interviewing people and chatting, and maybe some pockets full of stickers to hand out to people. Yeah. So we will see you all there. Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.